Hello my beautiful friends, welcome back to my channel. It is so good to have you back here again for a new episode. And if you are new here, hello and welcome. Why don't you stick around to see what kind of shocking but also very interesting true crime story that I have for you today. And of course, please do subscribe to the channel. Now before I get into the story, I have to give out a disclaimer that my channel is not meant to disrespect any of the victims or the families of the victims that I speak about in these videos. The information that I relay out to my audience is simply just research that I took from different sources of the internet and put together into one video. The purpose of my channel is for educational and awareness purposes of the different types of crimes that we face on a daily basis. And the content warning is that in this case, I will be talking about murder, mental health, sexual assault, as well as grievous bodily harm. So if you are sensitive to that type of content, then viewer discretion is very much advised. Now this week's case was actually suggested to me by one of us, the person whose name you see on the screen right now. And it was actually a while ago, but at that time I wanted to cover other cases before I do another serial killer case. And since last week I did talk about a serial killer case, I thought, you know what, let me just go back to this one and just do it anyway. And wow, and I mean wow. So take your seats, relax, and kick back as I tell you guys about the horrifying story of Joseph Ntshongwana, also known as the Axeman. On the 20th of March in 2011, a man named Thembinkosi was attending a funeral, but he knew that the next day he had to go back to work because his boss was expecting him to be in. And so as soon as the funeral ended, he drove back to his home in Lamontville, Durban, where his girlfriend was waiting for him to come back. As soon as he got back to Lamontville, he stopped at a gas station and called his girlfriend to see if there's anything that she may need from him. And his girlfriend said, yeah, can you please just come with some bread? Now, according to my research, at this point, Thembinkosi was just 5 minutes away from home. So obviously, his girlfriend was expecting him to be home at any minute. And at this time, it was around 9:15 p.m. Then just moments after that, a man named Gildred Johnwill was driving on his way back home. Then suddenly he looked to the side of the road, and what he saw on the side of the road seemed like two men that were fighting. And so as he got closer, he saw one of them standing over the other, and the other one was laying on the ground. And when he looked even closer, he saw that this man who was standing over the other guy was holding some sort of an object. And then he saw that it was an axe, and this guy was hacking the other guy on the ground into pieces. So he drove back home as fast as he could, and when he got there, he tried to call the police. And then just moments after that, another person driving on the same road saw the very same thing. But at first, he thought that he saw a guy killing some kind of an animal. So he stopped just 50 meters away from the scene, and then he went back to see what's really going on. And that's when he saw that this was not an animal at all. This guy was actually killing another human being. So he tried to call the police, but of course, the killer ran off into the darkness before the police would even get there. Now, both witnesses described this man as a huge black male who looked well built, and he was wearing dark clothes. But they couldn't really get a good look at his face, so they could not give a definite description of how his face looked like. And when the police were taking a look at the scene, they saw that this man who was killed was almost completely decapitated, as in like his head was literally hanging by just threads of tissue that were keeping it from falling off his neck. And of course, this victim was identified to be Thembinkosi, and he was attacked just moments after buying the bread that his girlfriend asked him to come with, because the bread was also found on the scene. So then just 45 minutes later, at around 10 p.m., Thembinkosi's girlfriend was starting to get worried because the man was just 5 minutes away from home, but it was already 45 minutes since he called. So now she wanted to know what's going on. So she ended up trying to call his phone, and his phone was picked up by one of the police officers. And instead of just telling her that there had actually been an incident involving her boyfriend, Or instead of just saying, you know what, we're going to come over to you right now and talk to you about your boyfriend, this police officer just said, you know what, we're with him right now and we'll bring him to you. Like, what? And obviously she found this very strange, and then just 15 minutes later she called again and the phone was picked up by another officer. And this time she was told that Thembinkosi was just sleeping and as soon as he wakes up they will bring him to her. You know, I have no idea why they were being so weird about it. I have no idea why they were just hiding the truth of the situation from her, knowing that he was already dead, because that just wasn't okay at all. She stayed on the property of her boss, and so after these two weird calls, she decided to go to her boss and ask for a ride to the police station. And on the way to the police station, they actually passed the crime scene of Thembinkosi, but his body was already covered up, so they couldn't really see that it was him. But she somehow had a very bad feeling about that. And so when she got to the police station, they had a talk with her and told her that there had been an incident involving her boyfriend. And then they took her to the crime scene, and that's when she identified him as Thembinkosi based on the clothes that he was wearing. Now just 24 hours later, on the 21st of March in 2011, a man was walking alone late at night going back home when he suddenly noticed that there was a silver car that was slowly driving behind him. And then this car stopped and a man got out of that car. And this man started walking behind this other guy. And as he did this, he grabbed him by his shirt, but then the man managed to get himself free and he managed to run away. But as soon as the man who was walking by himself started running for his life, the man who got out of the car threw an axe at him and it hit him on his back. But luckily it didn't kill him, and this man managed to get to the safety of his home before anything sinister could happen. Then on the next day, on the 22nd of March in 2011, a dead man's body was found, and this guy was found completely decapitated, and as a matter of fact, his head was missing from the scene, almost like the killer took his head and he left with it. And he was discovered by a community member, and it looked like this man was coming back from work based on the security uniform that he was wearing, and it seemed like he worked at a local KFC franchise. So after this person discovered this decapitated body, he obviously called the police. The detective who went over to the scene was Detective Warrant Officer Zakele Mbambo. And when he got to the scene, he took a look at it and he saw that on the ground around the victim were marks that seemed to have been made by an axe striking the ground. And also there was just so much blood, because since the man was decapitated, the blood was just rushing out of his neck and it was just all over the place. And even though it was already late at night, the detective decided to go door to door asking people if they saw or heard anything regarding this man's death. And this was actually a pretty good idea, because as he was doing this, he managed to get to the house where the man lived. So he was welcomed in by his wife, who was expecting her husband to already be back from work at that time. But the family waited and waited and he never showed. So this means that this guy was killed not that far from his home. So when the detective kept on talking with the wife of the victim, he found out that the man who was killed was a man named Paulos Ntshongwana. And he was identified based on his clothing as well. And his wife said that the last time she saw her husband was around 1:15 p.m. that day when he was going to work, but he was supposed to be back just a couple of hours after that, but he never showed. And then just moments later, after the body was discovered, a homeless man was scavenging through trash cans looking for something to eat. And as he was doing this, he came across one trash can that seemed like it had something strange inside of it. And as he took a closer look to see what this was, he saw that this was the head of a human being. And so he ran off and went to go tell the police. And after investigators took the head and it was analyzed, it was identified to be the head of Paulos Ntshongwana. And now investigators from the first murder that I talked about, the murder of Thembinkosi, and the investigators of this murder were starting to talk, and they realized something, that both these men could have been killed by the same person, because these two murders had one thing in common: decapitation. As the investigation of Paulos' murder was underway, it was discovered that there were two other security guards who saw what happened, but they were reluctant to come forward with the information because they thought his murder was a multi-murder. And for those of you who may not know, a multi-murder is the type of murder that involves human sacrifice, where human body parts are taken by witch doctors or traditional healers to use for medicinal purposes or to practice witchcraft. But the more investigators kept on looking into the murder of Paulo Ntshongwana, the more witnesses kept coming up with information. One witness was a woman who lived near the crime scene, and she said that she saw what happened, but she had no idea who to go to about the information, and also she was very much terrified and traumatized of the thing that she saw. Now apparently, according to the woman, there was a silver car that she saw at the scene, and the security guards also said the very same thing, and they all said that there was a man who stepped out of the car with what looked like a plastic bag, and he took something from the scene and then he put it into the bag and then he drove away. Another similar thing that the woman and the security guards also said was that this man looked like a huge, well-built man who seemed like the kind of person who would play rugby. And if you remember from the first murder that I spoke about, the witnesses of that case also said the very same thing, that they saw a huge man who was well built. On the 23rd of March in 2011, police got information that on the same day of the 22nd of March in 2011, earlier before Paulo Ntshongwana was killed, there was actually a similar attack, but the person who got attacked at that moment actually survived, and the man's name is Felix Ntuli. So at this point we have two men who were killed, one on the 20th of March and the other one on the 22nd of March. And then we also have two men who survived being attacked, one from the 21st of March and the other one from the 22nd of March, just hours before Paulo Ntshongwana was killed. So on the 23rd of March, when the witness was telling investigators about the attack on Felix, the witness said that Felix was just walking alone on the road when a man driving a silver car was coming up from behind him slowly, and he was trying to talk to Felix. Then the man drove off and then turned the car around and stopped it in front of Felix. And as he came out with something that looked like a plastic bag. The witness said that this man was a gigantic, well-built man, again the same description given by the other witnesses. Now the conversation between Felix and this gigantic man seemed to be getting pretty heated, because this man was accusing Felix of being one of the men who sexually assaulted his daughter and infected her with HIV. But Felix had no idea what this man was talking about. He had no idea what the hell was happening. And so as he was trying to figure out what's happening, this man took out an axe out of the plastic bag that he was holding and he attempted to strike Felix. Felix then moved out of the way, but then he got hit on the side of his ribs. But then luckily after that, he managed to run off and then he escaped the man. And even though this guy tried to chase after him, Felix was able to escape with his life. So when investigators got this information, they realized that on the 22nd of March in 2011, Felix was supposed to be the murder victim of the Axeman that day. But since he escaped, the Axeman started looking for another victim, which led to him finding Paulo Ntshongwana. Now I know I've been throwing a lot of dates and details at you like a madman, but stay with me, okay? This case is quite complicated, but it's also very interesting. And it's got a complicated timeline, but I'm going to try as much as I can to make it as understandable as I possibly can. So now we're on the 23rd of March in 2011, and this was hours before the police got information about Felix Ntuli. It was around 3 a.m. A man was sitting in his house when he suddenly heard noises coming from the outside, and when he looked through his window to see what's going on, that's when he saw two men. One was standing over the other and the other one was just lying on the ground. And when he looked closer, he saw that this man who was standing over the other one was continuously striking this guy on the ground with an axe. And so when he screamed at this guy to stop what he's doing, that's when this guy ran off into the darkness before he could be caught. And so this man got out of his house and went outside to get a closer look at this man on the ground, and that's when he saw that this guy was already dead. And so he called the police and told them what happened, and like the other witnesses, he gave the same description of a tall, well-built black man who was carrying an axe. Then one of the leading investigators in Lemontville, Durban, Colonel Jason McGray, decided to call one of the most well-known criminal profilers and forensic psychologists, Dr. Gerard Labuschagne. because at this point there had been 3 murders and 2 attempted murders in just a span of a few days between the 20th and the 23rd of March in 2011. And it was very obvious that these were committed by the same person. And it turned out that fortunately Dr. Gerard was already in Durban working on a different case. So since he was already in the area, it was going to be easy for him to come and help out with the case. So he told Colonel Jason that he's going to come see him on the next day on the 24th of March in 2011. So the day came and they did meet up and talk about these strange cases. And then Dr. Gerard decided to go back to the crime scenes to get a better experience, a better feel, or a better idea of what kind of killer he's dealing with here. So now investigators were looking at the information that they got from the witnesses, and they realized that almost all the witnesses said that they saw this man driving a silver Peugeot car with Eastern Cape license plates. So they decided to track this car and see who owns it and where this person lives. And they discovered that the car was owned by a woman named Mrs. Letlaka, and she lived in Yellowwood Park in Lemonville, not that far from where the victims were attacked. And when the police got to Yellowwood Park, they started questioning residents about a tall black man who was huge, well-built, and looked like someone who would play rugby. And surprise, surprise, the residents actually said, yeah, we know the kind of guy you're talking about, who drives a silver car and who also looks like the kind of person who would play rugby or even wrestling. And that guy is Joseph Ntshongwana. So now the investigators had a name, a place, and the identification of a suspect. Then on the 29th of March in 2011, investigators decided to go to the house of Joseph, and they went with some backup officers. Some officers went through the back and the other ones went through the front to make sure that they seal off any exit for escape. As the officers who went around the back got to the back, they saw the back door opening, and as they were looking at the person coming out of the door, they saw this tall, huge black man coming out. When they saw that this guy fit the description that they were given by the witnesses, they arrested him so they can have a look through the house and see what kind of evidence they could find in his possession. They also started to look for this silver car that everyone was talking about. But unfortunately, they didn't find the car. It turns out that the car was an insurance rental car, and it was given to Miss Letlaka, who's Joseph's mom, when her car was involved in an accident. So at this point, the insurance company had taken the car back before the police could find it at the property. But when the car was returned back to the insurance company, it wasn't really in the best shape. It was a bit roughed up and there was some blood inside of it. And so when the insurance company saw this, they decided to keep the car aside, untouched, while they do their investigations. And this was actually fortunate for the police because it meant that whatever evidence was in the car would be preserved. So still at the house, investigators were trying to find any sort of evidence. And then one of them noticed this foul smell coming from somewhere in the house. And as he was tracking it down, he tracked it down to a doghouse that was found on the property. And this was very strange because the property had no dog. But since the smell was coming from the doghouse, he decided to look inside to see what's going on. And that's when he found some bloody clothes, rotting pieces of meat, an axe, some Nike shoes, but one of the shoes had a toe tag missing, and he also found some plastic bags as well as some white socks. Now keep the Nike shoes in mind because they're going to be very important later on, especially the one with the missing toe tag. And then Joseph's room was sealed off so that investigators can preserve any evidence that could be found in that room. Then a few days later, after Joseph was arrested, the National Crime Scene Management went over to Durban to try to help out with collecting any evidence from the scene, and so they went with their top forensic investigators. And one of these investigators got into Joseph's room and he started spraying this thing called a Blue Star crime scene spray. And what it does is it actually shows areas in a room where blood had been spilled before, but it got wiped off. So as he did this, he did find that there was some blood spilled in Joseph's room, and then he also found that there was some blood in the bathroom as well, but it got wiped off. And the DNA on this blood that was wiped off was analyzed, and it was discovered that the blood that was found in Joseph's room and bathroom was the blood of an unidentified female and an unidentified male. But their DNA didn't match any of the victims that have already been found thus far. So this meant that there could still be 2 or possibly even more victims out there waiting to be found. Or maybe these ones actually survived and they just chose not to come forward. A few days after Joseph was arrested, criminal profiler and forensic psychologist Dr. Jared Labaskachny got the chance to finally sit down with this man and figure out what's going on in his twisted mind. And Dr. Jared discovered that Joseph was from a pretty normal family, a pretty normal background. His mother was a lawyer and his father was a South African diplomat who was involved in foreign affairs. And he also had a sister. Joseph went to a high school known as the Settlers Agricultural High School, which is a very well-known high school in the province of Limpopo. After that, he went to go study at the Tshwane University of Technology, and he was actually a rugby player. He played for the Blue Bulls rugby union team, and it also seemed like he had a very bright future ahead of him. So what in the world could have gone wrong with him? So if you remember correctly, when Joseph attacked one of his survivors, Felix Ntuli, he accused him of being one of the men who sexually assaulted his daughter and infected her with HIV, right? Well, it turns out that Joseph never even had a daughter to begin with. He only had a 5-year-old son who he never even had a good relationship with to begin with. Dr. Jared discovered that in 2009, Joseph was diagnosed with mental issues. He was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which is a combination of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And like I said in episode 20, which I will link up here for you to see if you haven't checked it out, schizophrenia is a mental disorder that causes a person to suffer from abnormal thinking, hallucinations, and delusions. But it can be treated with the right treatment and proper management. And that could prevent any further mental complications from occurring. And bipolar disorder is a lifelong mental condition that causes extreme mood swings. And these mood swings can be emotional highs such as mania and hypomania, as well as emotional lows such as depression. But with proper treatment, medication, as well as psychological counseling, bipolar disorder can be managed. But the patient has to keep taking their medication, going for their counseling, and going for their treatment, because that is very important. So Joseph was suffering from a combination of these 2 mental conditions, which now takes us back to the issue of the fake daughter, because it gives us 2 questions. The first question is, was it really just a cover-up story just so he can kill people and get sympathy for avenging his daughter? Or 2, was it really a real thing to him, but it was just a delusion that was caused by his mental conditions? So basically, what state of mind was Joseph in when he committed these crimes? On the 1st of April in 2011, not long after Joseph was arrested, it was discovered that there were 2 other victims of his. A man in Yellowwood Park was walking with his dog one day when his dog led him into some bushes. When he followed the dog into the bushes, that's when he came across the body of a black man with his pants pulled down. This man was badly decomposed at this point, and his face was smashed in so badly that he couldn't be identified. And when investigators got to the scene, they found a toe cap next to this man. And then they started remembering that, wait a minute, a few days ago when we arrested Joseph, we found a pair of Nike shoes, and one of the shoes was missing a toe cap. The toe cap was analyzed and it was discovered that it was actually the toe cap of his shoes, which means that this man was another one of Joseph's victims, bringing the total count of his murders to 4 kills. And based on how badly decomposed this man was, investigators were starting to believe that this could have been Joseph's very first victim. Now, the second victim that was found actually goes back all the way back to 2010 in November on the 28th. But this woman survived. But even though she survived, she chose to keep her identity as a secret from the public. So we're going to give her the name of Rose. In November of 2010, Rose was visiting Durban, and then on one occasion she was walking back to her flat by herself when Joseph pulled in on his car right next to her and started talking to her. So they did talk for a little bit, and then Joseph offered her a ride home, and then she accepted. But after a while of driving around, she noticed that Joseph had no intention of taking her home. And this is when Joseph drove to his home instead, where he held Rose captive, sexually assaulted her, and possibly tortured her for 3 days. And at some instances, he was even accusing her of being an ex-girlfriend of his who cheated on him. But on the third day of being held captive, Rose actually managed to outsmart Joseph, and she managed to escape and survive. On that third day, before she managed to escape, Joseph ordered some pizza, and once he stepped out of the room, he locked her inside. Then she noticed that he left his ID right next to her, and that's when she took it before he could notice, and she hid it in her clothes. And when Joseph finally came back with the pizza, she also stole the receipt that he got from the pizza delivery. Joseph started telling her the story of his non-existent daughter and how he killed people for what they did to her. Then he started telling Rose that she had to stay with him and be his girlfriend now. And this is when Rose realized that this guy was completely insane. But again, she played her cards very well. She told Joseph that, you know what, I want to be your girlfriend too, but we gotta go back to my flat so I can get the rest of my clothes and then come back so we can live together. And this actually worked. It really worked. When Joseph and Rose left, she managed to escape and run as fast as she could. And when she got to the nearest police station, she showed them Joseph's ID and the receipt that he got from the pizza delivery, and she told them everything that happened. So the police went over to Joseph's house to find out what's really going on. But when they got there, Joseph was not around. Instead, they found his mom. And they spoke to her about what Rose told them, and then his mom told them that, you know what, my son is suffering from mental issues. But she had no idea that he had a girl locked up in his room for 3 days. And then after hearing that Joseph was suffering from mental issues, the police just left. Nothing was done about the case of Rose. And if you think about it, had he been arrested right there and then, it could have prevented the murders of the 4 people who were killed in 2011. But it seemed like his mental conditions somehow got him a free pass. Now, after he got arrested, before his trial could start, it had to be determined if Joseph was mentally competent to stand trial. His defense team argued that Joseph was criminally insane and he was mentally unfit to stand trial, and so he shouldn't be held fully responsible because he was not in control of his actions. Basically, he's not guilty due to reasons of insanity. But the prosecution managed to provide evidence that Joseph was mentally competent to stand trial, and that the evidence that they had will prove in trial that he should be held fully accountable for his actions. The court ended up ruling in favor of the prosecution, and so the case of Joseph Ntshongwana was headed to trial on the 19th of November in 2012. In Joseph's trial, his defense team still argued that he shouldn't be held responsible because he doesn't even remember committing these crimes. They continued to argue that if the prosecution brought forth any evidence that proves that he actually did do the crimes, that evidence should be dismissed because Joseph was suffering from delusional disorder. So basically, he wasn't thinking straight. And for those of you who may not know, cases like these are very fragile because once a person claims that they are insane and psychological evaluations end up agreeing with them, that person will not be found guilty on grounds of insanity, which means they might not face any real time in prison, but instead they will only be sent to a mental institution for psych evaluations. Because the law's definition of criminal insanity is that the defendant never understood and was never aware of his or her actions and the consequences of those actions. And for that reason, they never saw anything wrong with what they did, and so they are criminally insane. So this meant that the prosecution had to provide concrete evidence to prove that this guy was in his right mind when he committed these crimes, and that he knew exactly what he was doing. So basically, his mental conditions that he was diagnosed with in 2009 had nothing to do with his actions, and they were not the cause. And the prosecution did this by providing the fact that there was hidden evidence that was found at Joseph's property. And this was the evidence that was found in the doghouse on the day he got arrested. And if you remember correctly, that evidence included the murder weapon, which was the axe that he used to attack those people. And so the fact that he tried to hide that evidence from plain sight meant that he knew that if anyone were to find out, he would get in trouble for it. so he very much knew what he did. Another point of evidence that the prosecution brought forth was the whole thing about the insurance rental car and the blood that was found inside of it. When the insurance company was asking him about the blood that they found in the car, Joseph said that on that day he had a passenger with him in the car when the car got as damaged as it was when he returned it back to the insurance company. So this passenger got a nose injury, and then that's how they ended up bleeding inside of the car. But according to Joseph, it was just an accident. However, that was actually a lie. That was the blood of one of his victims. Therefore, by hiding the truth about the nature of that blood found in his car, he showed signs of being mentally aware of his actions, because he was trying to avoid the consequences of those actions. And that disqualified him as criminally insane because he tried to cover his tracks. Both the prosecution and the defense brought quite a number of witnesses to testify in the trial. And one of the key witnesses for the prosecution was the woman who escaped Joseph in 2010, the one who he gave the name of Rose since her identity was kept a secret. And a key witness for the defense was Joseph's sister and also a senior specialist psychiatrist by the name of Professor Gangart. And of course, Professor Gangart was going to testify that Joseph's mental condition was the cause of his actions. Professor Gangart went against the evaluations of 3 other psychiatrists who believed that Joseph was responsible for his actions and he was not under the influence of his mental conditions. He said that Joseph had paranoid personality traits, and for that reason, when his delusions came at a rapid rate, they could cause him to lose control of himself. He could become very hostile, aggressive, homicidal, and very violent. And for that reason, he was not fully himself when he committed these crimes. But of course, the evidence that the prosecution brought against Joseph was too solid for the court to believe his claims of being criminally insane. And on December 19th in 2014, Joseph was found guilty of all the charges that were laid against him. And he was sentenced to 5 life sentences for the 4 murders that he committed and the charges of sexual assault. And he was also given an additional 14 years for the charges of attempted murder and kidnapping. And he continues to serve his sentence to this day. But yeah guys, that was the case of Joseph Ntshongwana, also known as the Axeman. Again, I just want to give out a huge shout out to Hope Mkhize for bringing this case to my attention, and I'm sorry that it took me so long to cover it. Like I said, I wanted to do other cases first before getting to this one. But let me know what you guys think about this one. I definitely want to know your thoughts, so please put them down in the comment section below. But that is all that I have for you guys on today's episode. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. I appreciate your support more than you could ever know. It means the absolute world to me. And again, if you are new here, come on, just come over to the bright side and subscribe to the channel. Be part of the family for more true crime content. And if you want to check out my previous episodes, I will leave 2 of them right here for you so you can see what else I've talked about in the past, and you can also enjoy some of my other episodes. That being said, I will see you guys in the next episode. Enjoy the rest of your day, take care of yourselves, and until next time, cheers.